Hey all, I'm Heather and that's Chantel and we're Book Wild.
Today's video will be our June wrap-up, so we will jump right into the books we read this month.
Yeah, so we both completed our TBR choices from last month, so we're going to start with those, go back and forth. We're still kind of figuring out the format of how we want to do wrap-ups in the future. This month we lucked out and we both read about the same number of books. We'll see what happens in the future. So first we're going to give you guys our individual stats for the month. I read 9 books. 2 of those were 5 stars. 2 were 4 stars. There were 4 3 stars and 1 2 star. I read 2 memoirs, 3 thrillers, 2 fantasy, 1 nonfiction, and 1 fiction.
I read a total of 8 books this month. I had 2 5 stars, 2 4 stars, 1 2 star, and 3 books that I did not rate because they were memoirs and nonfiction, which I do not give a star rating to. And of those books, 3 were graphic novels, 1 was a nonfiction, 2 were memoirs, and 2 were fiction.
Cool. So we each completed our prompts from our TBR Chutes and Ladders game from June. So we're going to start with those and then we're going to go into all of the additional books that we read over the course of the month. The first book that I read to meet my TBR prompt was to read a book by a woman of color, and I had chosen Maya Angelou's I Know Why the Caged Bird Sings. This is a memoir written by Maya Angelou about her life from when she was a young girl up until she was 17. I rated this book 4 stars. I think it's undeniable that this book is insanely important, but there were parts of the writing that didn't connect with me. Again, like when I read a memoir, it is never about the story of a person's life, it's always about the writing. So her life is amazing. Like, obviously she's an amazing woman, there's no question about that, but like there were just some spots I had issue with when she was younger. Like, there's no way you would remember a quote from when you were 3 years old, that kind of thing. And then the last third of the book, I started really enjoying it, and like I felt like she was getting into her writing style because it was more recent. So overall, I gave it 4 stars, but I highly recommend it to everybody. Nice. Should we put them here when we're done?
Yeah,
Okay.
yeah, I like that. Okay. For my first Chutes and Ladders TBR pick, okay, this is the one. For my first Chutes and Ladders TBR pick, I also landed on prompt to select a book written by a woman of color. So for that, I went with Why Are All the Black Kids Sitting Together in the Cafeteria by Dr. Beverly Daniel Tatum. This was a really insightful read for me. I don't rate nonfiction or memoirs, and we have another video about our rating system coming out soon, so you should definitely check that out. But I highly recommend this book, specifically to people in college, whether it be students or working within the higher education setting.
And we have notes on the table in front of us, so if you see us looking down, we're not suddenly socially awkward. We just are looking at our notes.
Yes, thank you for saying that. So this is an exploration of the psychology of racism. The author talks about and stresses the importance of normalizing race conversations in everyday life, and what that means for identity development in young children, as well as students in higher education, as well as students who don't go on to college. There are a lot of really important conversations had in this book, and a lot of ways to approach these conversations, which I really appreciated. I thought that there was a lot of solid research presented in an understandable way, as well as further reading to expand one's understanding of racial experiences, racial conversations, and in what she hopes is the way to crossing racial and ethnic divides. I did also listen to the audiobook of this, which was read by the author, as well as reading along. I highly recommend the audiobook. I thought it was well paced, and the cadence of her voice, it was really easy to listen to and digest what she was saying. So I think that's a combination of the writing and the way the information was laid out, as well as the way it was narrated. I highly recommend it, and I think this is definitely a good one to pick up if you are looking to expand your understanding of racial conversations in the US.
So the next prompt that I had for our TBR Shoots and Ladders game was to read a book set at sea, and I had originally picked The Shipping News, but I decided to pick up The Deep by River Solomon because I wanted to read more books by Black authors, as well as more authors within the LGBTQIA plus community. So I picked this one up, and I talk about this a little bit more in the mid-year book freakout tag, and I'm actually going to be doing a dedicated review for this book as well, but I gave it 2 stars. The premise of the book is really cool. It's about a community of people who were formed when slave women who were pregnant were either thrown overboard or jumped overboard from off of slave ships. And these people are born under the sea, and they create their own community where they have a historian who holds the collective group's history because it's too painful for everyone to share. And so we learn about the historian and her process. She doesn't want to take it anymore. It's too painful. So much promise in this book, and I really appreciated the non-binary discussion in the book. But yeah, look for a review on this to get my full thoughts on The Deep. And Chantel is actually going to be picking it up in July, so she'll be able to give her opinion as well.
Cool. The second prompt that I had for our June Shoots and Ladders TBR was Get Graphic, which was to pick up a graphic novel, and for that I chose Wires and Nerve Volume 2 Gone Rogue. This is the continuation of the Lunar Chronicles series, set in the perspective of Aiko, who is an android with a malfunctioning personality chip, which gives Aiko the ability to exhibit and process human emotions. This was such a sweet read. It's a young adult book. So although this is geared toward a younger audience, it does touch on subjects like prejudice, friendship, morality, right and wrong, really important things in a easy to follow along way. I thought it was so sweet. The characters are not super developed, but that wouldn't have been my expectations for a YA novel geared toward younger readers. I thought it was so fun and cute, and it presented these important topics in a way that was sweet and relatable to young readers. So this was super sweet, and I loved the artwork. It has a monochromatic style, yeah. And I loved it.
Did you say what you rated it?
I rated this one. This one was funny. When I initially read it, I loved it. I rated it 5 stars, and then thinking more on it, I thought it was more of a 3-star read. I loved it so much, but it wouldn't really stick with me, so I'm going to do a compromise and land on a 4 stars for this one.
My third prompt for our June TBR Shoots and Ladders game was to read a thriller, and I read 3 thrillers. I was originally supposed to read The Husband's Secret by Leanne Moriarty. I ended up reading that, but I switched to The Little Stranger by Sarah Waters because she is a member of the queer community, and I falsely assumed that this book had some queer stuff happening in it. Not the case, my bad. I didn't really read what it was. But I ended up reading this 3 stars. It's a thriller about a house that is potentially haunted, potentially occupied by people who are suffering with mental degradation after a war, and it's almost like a historical fiction with a little bit of thriller in it, and it was a really beautifully written book, but it was not your typical thriller, and I liked reading it, but I was also kind of confused. Like, who are you, book? What are you doing? What are you trying to be? And I just had a lot of questions also while reading it that were never answered. So I gave it 3 stars. I definitely enjoyed it. Not my favorite thriller, though.
My third and final prompt for our June Shoots and Ladders TBR was to select what I thought would be a 5-star read, and for that I chose Shadow of the Wind by Carlos Ruiz Zafón, and this was a 5-star read. I adored this book. I loved these characters. New all-time fave. This story follows Daniel, who was born in Barcelona, Spain, and the story kicks off when Daniel is 10 or 11 years old in 1945, and it follows his life through his adulthood. It is the story of him and his father, their relationship, a quirky cast of characters, their love of reading, and uncovering the story of a writer who's not well known and
Has a mysterious past.
Yeah. I loved the characters in this book, the relationships. I loved seeing Danielle fumble throughout some of these relationships, and come to know himself through some of those fumbles, and I loved this book so much. The writing, the plot was amazing. The characters, I think, were well developed. The banter, the dialogue, I loved it. But also the writing was so beautiful, like very lyrical and magical. And I don't think that there is magic in this book, but
it feels like there should be.
Yeah, the premise was just, it felt magical. I loved it. For sure, 5 stars. And I cannot wait to pick up the other books in the series, as well as any other works by him if they are translated.
Yeah, most of them are translated now, yeah.
Nice.
Okay, so we are done with our TBR prompts, and everything that we read from here on out was just extra that we read this month. So I did read The Husband's Secret by Leanne Moriarty. This is a book thriller, domestic thriller, that a woman finds a letter that her husband wrote. She's not supposed to have found it. It contains a secret that affects all of the people's lives within this story. There's a lot of talk of Tupperware and the Berlin Wall randomly. I can see why people like Leanne Moriarty, but I wasn't super into it. I was like, okay, I don't know. I was expecting more of a thriller, and it was just more of an emotional thriller kind of, but a well-written one. But I gave it 3 stars. it was, I don't hate that I read it. Well, I probably won't read it again. I can see why my sister really liked it. That's about all I have to say. Yeah.
Cool. Over the last couple years, I have tried to diversify my reading and picking up stories, nonfiction, lots of different books, and
Told from perspectives that aren't ours.
yeah. Thank you, Heather.
Yeah.
But this month, because of the Black Lives Matter movement, as well as it being Pride Month, I really wanted to focus in on some of those things. And because of that, I picked up As the Crow Flies by Melanie Gilman. This, I thought, had so much promise. So I'm going to read the Goodreads.
Synopsis.
Yeah. Thank you. I'm going to read the Goodreads synopsis because it's short and sweet. It says, a comic about a queer black teenager who finds herself stranded in a dangerous and unfamiliar place, an all-white Christian youth backpacking camp. It sounded like it would be a really cool story. It's a graphic novel, so I just thought it would be precious. Overall, this got 2 stars from me. I will have a dedicated Goodreads review with my in-depth thoughts on it, but I thought that there was really important conversations mentioned here, but I don't think they fully landed with me, and I'll explore why in my written review. So if you're interested, go check that out.
The 5th book that I read in June was A Dance with Dragons, which is the 5th book in the Game of Thrones series by George R.R. Martin. I don't have a copy with me. I originally read the Game of Thrones series when they all first came out, and I still am following the series, still waiting for the 6th book. So I'm not going to go into like what the 5th book is about because of spoilers, but I will say that I read all the books before ever seeing the TV show, and then I watched the whole TV show, and this year I decided to go back and reread the whole series, and it was like, I was like, oh, I knew it was different from the show, but I didn't remember how much, and going back and rereading it was like a whole new reading experience, and just like reinvigorated my love for that world. So now I'm annoyed that I started rereading them because the 6th book isn't out yet, so now I'm like, pissed all over again that I will have to wait for however knows long until it comes out.
What did you rate it?
Oh, and I rated 5 stars.
Also read What Doesn't Kill You Makes You Blacker by Damon Young. I don't have a physical copy of this book. I listened to the audiobook on Script, so we'll put a picture up here. What Doesn't Kill You Makes You Blacker chronicles Young's life and his efforts to survive while battling and making sense of the various neuroses his country has given him. And that is directly from the book, but I think it is a good depiction of what that book is. It was humorous and relatable. It was an experience that I haven't much considered. I thought it was well written. I mentioned I listened to the audiobook. At first, the audiobook was a little rough for me to get into. It is read by Damon himself, the author. What? It is read by the author, and at first I had a hard time getting into the groove of the audiobook. It almost felt to me like he was uncomfortable in the first essay. It's a series of essays, but as he got more into the narrative, it was humorous, and I appreciated the inflections and the way that he was able to tell his own story. I laughed. I thought about the things that he was saying. It made me think critically. I really liked it. I recommend it. I don't rate memoirs, as I mentioned, but I highly recommend this book, especially as a lighter take on race conversations and the Black experience in our country today.
And this is one that Chantel has talked about just between the two of us, quite a lot, and keeps referring back to it, especially through this week as we've been having a lot of conversations about what we've been reading, and I downloaded the audiobook, and I'm really excited.
Did you?
Mm-hmm. I'm really excited to listen to this one as well.
Nice.
Yeah.
I love that.
That's nice.
Hey!
Okay. Okay, so the next 3 books that I'm going to be talking about are books that I picked for my TBR for the mini magical readathon that was supposed to be happening from June 22nd to the 28th, I think, something like that. Book Roast, G from Book Roast kind of talked about her thoughts on everything that's going on with J.K. Rowling, and the readathon kind of didn't really happen. Dissipated just because of everything that's going on, and we'll put a card to her video so you can get an idea of that. But I did want to read as much of the TBR that I had chosen for that video, and anything that I didn't get to, I will be reading within the month of July, separate from our Shoots and Ladders TBR. So I just wanted to note that. Yes. So one of the books that I read for that was Wilder Girls by Rory Power. This is a book, I talked about this in the mid-year book freakout tag as well that we have posted. But it's a book about a group of girls that are quarantined on an island off the coast of Maine. There's a tox that's running through the girls, and it disfigures their body. And we follow Hetty, who's the main character. Her friend Byatt goes missing on the island, and Hetty is determined to find her and save her from whatever happened to her. There's some queer representation in this book. I thought I was going to love it. I did not. I gave it somewhere between 2.5 and 3 stars. It just didn't really land for me. I talked about it again in the mid-year book freakout tag, but I'm also going to do a more detailed review of this book just because I have so much that I want to say about it.
The first book that I actually picked up in June was The Underground Abductor by Nathan Hale. And this is the illustrated story of Araminta Ross, more commonly known as Harriet Tubman, who guided runaway slaves north through a series or network of safe houses we know as the Underground Railroad. I loved this. I rated this 5 stars. I loved the artwork, which is monochromatic, similar to the other graphic novel, but it depicts Harriet Tubman's journeys in a really understandable way, and I think this is also geared toward a younger audience. However, I enjoyed it so much, and I learned things from this book. This book was also had an element of humor, which I appreciated, and also was one of the reasons why I felt like it was geared toward a younger audience, but I loved it. 5 stars, highly recommend. And quick, it's so short. So.
And I'm reading this book for the Reading Rush this month. Yeah. In July. So I also read a book about Harriet Tubman this month. We did not, I don't think, do that intentionally, but just happened. I read She Came to Slay, The Life and Times of Harriet Tubman by Erica Armstrong Dunbar. I, again, had a lot of hope for this book. I rated it 3 stars, not because of the story. The story of Harriet Tubman is amazing, and that is why I'm going to be reading The Underground Abductor in July, because I want to know more about Harriet Tubman, but the way that this book was written seemed hard to connect to. It's almost like a research paper, so there's clearly a lot of research that was done to put into this book, and obviously efforts were made to make it palatable for, I think, like teen young adults. But for me, I just had a hard time connecting to the story, and I don't think that all nonfiction needs to be written like a research paper. And for me, that's just what this felt like. It wasn't an enjoyable read. It felt like I was doing homework.
I want to say, which I feel like I would like that, so I definitely want to pick that up soon.
Yeah. And for me, I want nonfiction to still be written in a, like, right now I'm currently reading The 5 Untold Lives of the Women Killed by Jack the Ripper by Hallie Rubenhold, and it's a nonfiction book, but it's written in such a, like, gripping way, and so that's what I was hoping for this, and I'm frustrated. I'm almost frustrated with my reaction because I know people were so excited to have a book about Harriet Tubman that was written by a black woman. And this book is written by a white man. And I have conflicted feelings about that.
Yeah.
And so I am curious and hopeful for more black women and black men to write about Harriet Tubman, and just to, in general, again, increase the books that I'm reading by black authors and by authors of color, because I don't want the only book that I like about Harriet Tubman to be written by a white man. That's just doesn't sit well with me. So I'm going to go out and find all the Harriet Tubman books that I can find. But if you have a kid in high school or something like that, who is interested and it isn't necessarily an emotionally driven reader, then I would recommend She Came to Slay. The last two books that we are going to talk about, we actually both read this month, so we're both going to talk about them. The other book that we read together this month is The Color Purple by Alice Walker. We have a full dedicated book talk about this book and our love for it. We'll put up a card for that. I gave it 5 stars.
I gave it 4 stars. This book depicts the lives of African American women in the early 20th century Georgia. It's an epistolary novel spanning many years and portrays the lives of 2 sisters as they live through a lot of different things, domestic and sexual abuse, financial struggles, finding their purpose in life, finding their place in life, finding their love in life.
Everything.
Yeah,
this book is everything.
It covered so much, and as I'm sure you can tell by the way we're talking about it, we adored it.
James.
Yeah. We adored this book, and Heather mentioned we have a dedicated book review where we go into all the details on it.
Yeah.
So
I cannot recommend, like, there's nobody who should not read this book. It's amazing.
The first of the 2 books that we're going to talk about is Between the World and Me by Ta Nehisi Coates, and this is a letter to his son on his experience and thoughts on being black in the world today and growing up in a particular kind of household, and his experiences and how his experience differentiate from those of his son, and some intentional, others not so.
I have a lot of feelings about this book. We've been talking about this book a lot. We've been listening to it on audiobook together and then pausing like every minute to like break something down. It's written in a way that's cerebral almost, and it's almost like a philosophy book almost, like it's
Yeah.
And so it's not an easy read in the sense of every sentence is packed full of meaning, and you have to take time to digest what he is saying to really understand, to really feel the full impact, as well as we realized as we were going through this book that this book pulls from a lot of Black history that from Malcolm X, from the writings of James Baldwin, that we aren't familiar with. And so it's motivated us to go find the readings that he's talking about with Malcolm X and to read even more widely with that. And I've only read one book by James Baldwin, and so just realizing how much work we have to do, but in a really motivating way,
in a way that we're interested to do that.
Yeah, to fully understand all of the nuances of this book. So it's not a book that I would recommend to as a starter book in how to unlearn living in a systemically racist society. This is, I think, like an advanced learning experience that we both enjoyed, but coming back to it in a few years, we'll both take more from the book than we were able to take right now.
Right, and we haven't yet talked about that, but I also had thoughts that this is not a book that I would recommend to everybody, especially those who haven't started reading and picking up information on the Black experience, if that's not your experience. One of the things that I loved about this book was the way in which it was written. Heather talked about this briefly, how it's very philosophical. Every sentence packs a punch, and in that it's very lyrical and poetic. And Ta Nehisi talks about in this book his experience with writing poetry and other in
journalist. He's other writing.
In other writings, yeah, in other writings, and I think that really came through in this book. We listened to the audiobook as well as read along, and even just the way some lines were said. I remember pausing the audiobook at the beginning, and just saying, "Is this actually poetry?" And then we, flipped open to the book, and then as we were reading along, it's written like prose, but it was very lyrical and poetic. I loved that.
Yes. I also... Did I cut
No,
you off?
no.
Okay.
I was trying to think of like what... Because I'm making it sound like you didn't love that. So we want to say... What's the thing you didn't like?
So I loved the poetry of his writing style. He is clearly an amazing writer. There is no question that this man knows how to write, and that he is a critical thinker and thinks about things so thoughtfully. There were some things within the writing style that I didn't like that Chantel did really like. So there's some repetitive uses of like little phrases throughout, which is to really get the point across of those things. And that was that Chantel, I don't want to speak for you, but like that was effective for her, and for me, right. I don't like that as much.
It kind of, I think it interrupted your reading experience, whereas for me it strengthened those ideas for me, and it circled back around every time. I loved the repetition, and it just, to me, it didn't feel like repetition, it felt like reinforcing it.
Yeah.
Which I think you got that too.
Right. But it reinforced it, but then I was like, okay, I get it. You don't have to keep telling me. And then just, did you want to say anything more about that? Okay. Just the way that he spoke about the world was really beautiful. Like, he talks about loving people as a gateway to new worlds and new experiences, and he relates that back to traveling later on in the book, and just like that idea and the way that he explored it very briefly, because this is a pretty short book, but it was just so beautiful. And both of us, I think, are going to be picking up more of his writings because he is such a beautiful writer.
We're interested to experience
all his aspects of his writing.
Yeah, all the aspects of his writing, his thoughts, the way that he approaches an idea or a subject is different, and I like it, and I want to read more of that.
Yeah. And there were some, like, this book was profoundly heartbreaking in some spots. He talks about watching 9/11 and the title Between the World and Me talks about this, like, this breach between him and the rest of the world, and it's kind of explored in his observation of 9/11 and actually seeing it happening, and he feels removed from this human tragedy because it's built on this racially systemic society, and so he feels removed, and that is so it's just like heartbreaking in a way that I can't articulate, and is also, I think, could be divisive to people, and that's why I wouldn't recommend this to somebody who is just setting out on a journey to unlearn those behaviors and implicit biases, because I think that some people could interpret this as a more divisive read. So again, Chantel doesn't rate nonfiction or memoirs, but I rated this a 4.5 stars. I think there were just a little tiny repetitive things that kept me from giving it a 5-star, but I think that when we come back, we've both kind of committed to coming back to this book after a few years of growth and kind of exploring it again. And I'm curious to see what I'll think of it.
Me too. And I want to say too, while listening to the audiobook of this and picking it up to leaf through and kind of find our spots, the audiobook was 3.5 hours. It took us all week, 5 or 6 days to get through the audiobook. We were constantly pausing the book to have conversations. There was a lot of questions that I had, and I think that we tried to unpack. And I think one of the strong points of this book is just with any other book, it's a conversation starter. And I think we're both really open to hearing other people's reading experiences of this book and how it made them think
And feel.
Yeah.
Those are all of the books that we combined read in the month of June. We're both currently working on a few books that we'll hopefully finish in the first couple days of the month so we can get to all the other books that we want to read. I'm working on a few right now. I tend to read multiple books at the same time, but I just wanted to highlight the Let's Go Swimming on Doomsday by Natalie C. Anderson. I'm about a little over halfway through, and I love this book so far. I'm also about a third of the way into Shadow of the Wind because I was re-inspired to reread it after Chantel loved it, and then I'm also almost finished with The Five, The Untold Lives of the Women Killed by Jack the Ripper by Hallie Rubenhold, and I'm hoping to finish those in the next few days. I'll talk about them more next month.
Thank you for watching our video, and we will see you in the next one. Synopsis on Goodreads said 20 years, but they're 50 at the end of this book, and she's 20 when it starts. So it's...
No, she's like 6 when it starts.
Yeah! Goodreads is wrong!
Yeah, Goodreads.
It's Squirrel.
Okay. Don't come over here, you little shit.
Is he There's a squirrel.
Okay. Are you ready?
Yeah.
Okay.
Ah!
Should I not talk about books?
No, why not?
Okay.